Good afternoon. My name is Steve Altition. I'm the Director of Client Partnerships here at Lander Home Family Law, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our Facebook live broadcast. Today, we're going to talk about estate planning. We're going to talk about what estate planning is, what it encompasses. We're going to talk about why estate plans are important for everyone at every stage of your life. We're going to talk about what happens if you don't have an estate plan in place. And we're going to talk about how you can move forward with your estate plan even in today's environment. So to help us through these topics, I'm here with Triston Dallas. Hey, Triston, how's it going?
How you doing, Steve? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm doing well. So Triston is an associate here at Lander Home Family Law. He helps our clients through the entire estate planning process, from helping to educate and strategize with them about their estate plan needs to creating and setting up the right documents to do the job. So before we start, I do want to encourage anyone listening to this live broadcast to submit any questions you have, and we'll try to get our best answers to you at the end of the broadcast. Additionally, if you're interested in learning more about family law topics, we have a podcast called Modern Family Matters. These podcasts cover a wide range of topics from divorce and custody to adoption and estate planning. You can get updates about the new episodes on our Facebook page, Instagram, and the Apple Store. So now, on to our topic. I want to start with a couple statistics. Only 42% of U.S. adults have any estate planning documents in place, even a will. Worse, 36% of parents only with children under the age of 18 have any end-of-life plans in place. And it gets worse with younger populations. Just 28% of millennials have wills. I'm going to give you one last statistic. 76% of people who have no estate plans at all say either I don't have enough assets or I just haven't gotten around to it. Hey, I get it. Contemplating your own death is not exactly high on anyone's to-do list, but it's important to overcome this barrier and to take control of your assets, to take control of your estate plan. And for that, Triston, let's start with the basics. Just what is an estate plan?
Great question there, Steve. Actually, let's go ahead and let me back up a little bit. I want to throw in an extra statistic there. Most people, being us non-celebrity types, we're not alone in that even those with high estates and those with a lot of money also make the mistake of not having an estate plan. If I remember correctly, Prince didn't have an estate plan. Jimi Hendrix didn't have an estate plan. And so these are people with multi-million dollars, multiple properties, in the States, abroad. It can get really convoluted and really messy when you don't have an estate plan with that amount of money, but it also can be as messy when you don't have that amount of money and still don't have an estate plan. But to back up a little bit before we say what is an estate plan, let's ask what is an estate? An estate is everything you own. Everybody has an estate. You, me, your neighbors, everybody, from an early age until you are elderly. And estate is your home, your cars, your personal assets, your bank accounts, all of it. And so the plan, and what estate planning does, is creates kind of a roadmap as to how is your estate managed while you're still alive, and how does it pass to your heirs and your family members or your beneficiaries when you have passed away. And that's the long and short of it of, what is the basic estate plan.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I'm wondering, they talk about, you talk about estate plans and you're passing stuff on. Mm-hmm. It seems you can even sort of pass your values on. There's ways that you can do that and really kind of make what you think is important, even on a non-asset level, flow down through to your kids. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, some of the most important things to people is, their religion, their values. If you have a family or a set of parents that, have kids and something happens to both of them, but they want to make sure their kids are raised by, in Catholicism or Judaism or whatever it may be, you can also, leave instructions on how you want your kids to be raised, and even leave instruction as to who you would want them to be raised by, and step in and be a guardian. And presumably you could leave, instructions. Hey, I want my child to be raised by X X, Y, or Z, and if that person can't do it, they want to be in a home that, believes in Catholicism. Really, the sky's the limit for the most part with estate planning. You can have a lot of options as to how you would want, things to, your estate to be managed, but also your family to be taken care of in the event you're no longer here.
So if someone's thinking about this, thinking about how they want to manage a lot of these issues, I mean, what are some of the initial questions they should sort of ask themselves about before they, start to think about how to make an estate plan?
Yeah. Most people think, oh, I just need to figure out where's my bank account go and who's going to get my car. But really big questions that, and every person should think about is, well, who do I want to play what roles in my estate if something happens to me? Not just when you pass away, but what if you become incapacitated or have a terminal illness or anything like that? Who do you want to play like power of attorney and make financial decisions and handle your affairs if something happens to you? Who do you want to make medical decisions if you can no longer do so? But also, who do you want to play like your personal representative or executor and manage your estate if something happens to you? Or who's going to be guardian or custodian or conservator? Those questions and those individuals are just as important in answering and understanding as figuring out who's going to get your car and who's going to get your tool set.
That kind of made me think of a question. You mentioned you name your guardian, you suggest you want as your conservator or your trustee.
Yep.
Those seem like two really different skill sets. But I see where a lot of people just name the same person, and it seems like that those are different kind of jobs.
Yeah, I mean, one person can fill all those roles and will be a very busy individual for sure. But so are parents, and the parents are essentially filling all those roles while they're here, especially when there's children. But yeah, I mean, somebody that's going to act as your healthcare representative may not necessarily be the person you want to act as your power of attorney for your affairs or to be conservator for assets for your children. One is going to be a lot more detailed. Somebody acting as a trustee and somebody acting as a custodian may be very different because there's a lot more that's involved with being a trustee than there is being a custodian. And so it's possible for an individual to play all the roles. But when you're working with an attorney and trying to get an estate plan put up and put together, I mean, it's important to discuss the differences between each role and who, really think about who in your circle and your family, your friends would be able to manage and handle that role if something was to happen to you.
That makes total sense. It even feels kind of like if you've got a couple of different people, let's say for the conservator and the guardian, there's a little bit of a system of checks and balances going on in there.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes the process, I won't say difficult, but a little bit more arduous, if you will, having so many different people. But you're right, it does create some checks and balances because it makes sure everybody's kind of crossing their T's, dotting their I's, doing everything that's necessary. When it's all one person, and again, it's very possible for one person to handle all of that. But when it is all one person, they may overlook something or miss something because they're handling so much. Essentially, that person is trying to manage your own life and the estate and affairs and the life of another. So it's very possible to miss something. When you have kind of a committee of people that are going to help with an individual's estate or affairs, it makes things a little bit easier and not so much weight is on one person's shoulders. So
just listening to you, it becomes obvious to me that an estate plan is more than just a will.
Absolutely.
We've talked about guardians and trusts and all of that stuff. So, what makes up a complete will package?
Yeah, well, let me touch on your first comment then. It's absolutely more than just a will. It is absolutely more than just the four corners of any document. Again, you're talking about the people who's going to be managing your estate or acting in whatever roles in your estate plan, but also you would have to consider what are things that are going to be connected to my will or my trust that I need to make sure is taken care of. Your insurances, your life insurance, those types of things. You want to make sure that they are congruent with your estate plan, your bank accounts, any of that stuff. So it's going to be a little bit more than just, having a document written and you're good to go. That's a step, and it's a big step, but it's not everything. And a lot of things can be missed, especially when you start getting into tax planning and estate tax planning. It's going to be more than just having the document. The document is going to play a big role, but there's going to be a lot of analysis that needs to go into beyond just what's written on the four corners.
That makes such complete sense. In my former life, I used to deal with a lot with insurance folks. And one of the things that we would run up against all the time was having to talk to people who had, let's say, a benefit life insurance through their work. Mm-hmm. Well, they would work on their estate plan. Maybe we would make a will and name their beneficiaries, but they would never bother to change their insurance beneficiary. Yep. And I had a case where an insurance agent for the business himself forgot to do that. He died. And his wife was very surprised to find out at that point that his ex-wife his policy. Yep. So you're right. There's so many different things you have to go through rather than just the four corners of the document. Yep. Again, with HIPAA, and you've run in with that, as you get to the end of the life, I mean, those kinds of things become really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer the second part of your previous question, what makes up a full estate plan? It really just depends. Every family is going to be a little bit different. If you're married, or if you have children, or if you've remarried and have, children from a former spouse and your current spouse, every family is going to be a little bit different. But the typical documents you would see in an estate plan is power of attorney, an advance directive discussing end of life care and who would make decisions for you in the event of your incapacitation, medical decisions, a will, a trust or a pour of a will, maybe even multiple trusts. You can have a trust within a will if necessary that won't necessarily become live, so to speak, until you've passed away. There's a lot of ways to kind of go about it. And so, most people may think, oh, it's just a will or it's just a trust. But also it can contain, disposition of remains. How do you want to make sure, or who do you want to leave the decision making as far as, like, do you want to be entombed or cremated or anything like that? Sometimes that's really important to people. And that goes back to, your question about value. Some people, it's very important for, them and their remains to be disposed of in a very certain way. So there's a lot of, some small documents that can fit into a estate plan. That's going to be more than just a will or a trust.
Oh my gosh. So understanding that everyone needs it. I mean, that really makes sense. Because it sounds like once you do your estate plan, it starts when you sign, and it keeps going until after you die. This is a long-term document. This isn't a thing just for something in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're young, and let's say, you just got married and you have an estate plan, I would recommend any individual who creates an estate plan to look at it every time that there is a big event in their life. So if they had new children, significant increase in wages, divorce, remarry, any big event like that, retirement, anything like that, you should take a look at your estate plan and see what's changed. But also, I would always recommend every 5 years or so, look at your estate plan again. Laws change, taxes, sometimes the tax administration changes based on the administration and who's in the White House. And so, you may have created something 4 years ago, but today it's very, very different. You look at, there is and I won't get too much into the nitty-gritty of laws, but there was a big act passed last December in the Secure Act that changed how retirement accounts are passed from one individual to another. And so if you've created an estate plan that, looked at the old laws, it may not necessarily apply exactly the way that you're hoping it to in the event you've passed away after the active come into play. So you're right in thinking it's not just, okay, I've done it, it's done, I don't have to take a look at it again. Hopefully the estate plan can be flexible enough to cover changes in your life, but it won't be able to cover everything all the time because the laws are always fluctuating and changing.
Well, and the laws in different states obviously are different.
Yep.
And it makes me think of Oregon, for instance, is what they call like a separate property state.
Yep.
But every single state around us is a community property state.
Yeah.
And so what happens if I move from a community property state to a separate property, or vice versa? It seems like that's a real trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving is definitely one too, especially moving out of state. In that specific instance, again, not getting into nitty gritty of the law. Yeah, I mean, it really would kind of depend on, to some extent, where your property still is. You know, if you held the property in that community property state, but then you got new property in Oregon, you know, you might end up in a situation where multiple probates multiple court cases are necessary. But yeah, when you move into a different state with different laws and trying to understand, okay, how that's going to be probated. In Oregon, you look at like a tax issue. Oregon's, tax threshold for estate tax exemption is $1 million for an estate. And in Washington, I think it's 2.5, something around that. So if you've not close to it in Washington, and say you have a $1.7 million estate, but you've moved to Oregon, now you're going to be looking at a tax bill, an estate tax bill, that you wouldn't have had in Washington. So you may have to take some steps in order to avoid that if possible.
Well, that makes sense. Well, and like you're saying, one of the things is you're sure that your money and your children go where you want them to in case when you die, which kind of leads to the question, which I think is the opposite in terms of good. And it's, what the heck happens if you die without a will?
Yeah.
Where are you then?
Yeah, a lot can happen. Again, your plan will enumerate how you want your estate to pass on in the event of your passing. When you do not have an estate plan, you don't have a will or trust or anything like that, essentially you are leaving it up to the state to decide how your assets are passed. Now, it being 2020, this wouldn't be the first time that the state would have dealt with this. So they've created laws to try and make it simple for people to understand, but even then, it isn't as simple as we would ever hope. The short of it is, if you don't have a will, don't have a trust or any estate plan, the way that the court looks at it, the best way I can explain is somewhat of an analogy. If you put yourself in the middle of a compass, and if you pass away without an estate, the first thing the court's going to do is look down. They're going to look south. They're going to look to see if you have any children. If you're not married. If you're married, everything goes to your spouse. Then they're going to look down. If you don't have children, then they're going to look up to see they'll look north to see if you have any parents. If your parents are not alive, then they look east and west to see if you have any siblings and if your siblings have children. And if there's nobody there at that point, you have no next of kin, it's very possible that essentially everything that you have would then go to the state. And the state would essentially own your estate, whether it's home or cars or whatever. If they can't find a next of kin as a beneficiary, then everything goes to the state.
So you've lost the control you really wanted to have where you wanted to live.
Absolutely.
That doesn't seem like it's a particular situation you want to be.
It's not the greatest choice to make. And going back a little earlier to we briefly touched on, you don't necessarily need to have millions and millions of dollars to have an estate plan. Estate planning isn't based on the value of your estate. The estate planning is based on your specific values and how you want that to pass on to your next of kin, your heirs, the next generation. And sometimes it's as simple as you want to make sure that the home that you have stays within the family. And if that may not be accomplished without an estate plan. Even if it's a simpler will or a simpler trust, if you don't have anything like, oh yeah, well, my sons or my daughters will just get my estate. Maybe not. Maybe you have a debt and the court's going to say, well, we're just going to sell the home to pay for the debt. And if you had an estate plan, you may be able to have avoided that. So it doesn't necessarily mean you need to have millions of dollars to create an estate plan. I just want to make sure that's clear. You could have $4, you could have $4 million. It still may be very well important to you and important to your heirs and your family to create that plan.
That makes complete sense, especially if, let's say someone has one of your kids inherit something and, they don't necessarily have something, but they have an inheritance coming, then they can do something with that. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons for even, young adults to have an estate plan.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife, before we got married, she had a little bit of a plan. She wanted to make sure that if something happens to her, her brother's son would be taken care of. And otherwise, it wouldn't necessarily have gone that way. Obviously, she's still with us, and it's not necessarily an issue, and we're married now. But without taking those steps to make sure that it's going to the people in your family you want it to, in the way that you want it, the state's not necessarily going to come up with the best case scenario. And the state, more times than not, is not going to think in the exact same way that you think as far as like what's important to you. Some families may say, hey, I want my son to inherit from my estate if I was to pass away before he graduated, high school. But I want to make sure that he doesn't get anything or a majority of that estate until he's graduated college. But you can use the estate to pay for college. And so the court isn't going to step in and be like, that's a really good idea. We should do that, even if you didn't have an estate plan. They're just going to say, well, if he's the only heir, he's going to get everything. You, regardless of how much money it is, trying to give a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old a good sum of money, it's very likely that there's not going to be much left in weeks to come. So you can plan that way as well.
I like it. So a lot of people love what you're saying, totally agree with everything you're saying, but they're saying, well, what do I need you for? I mean, there's will kits out there. Why can't I do my own estate planning?
Yep. Well, it goes back to our comment or the topic earlier of it's not just the four corners of the document. You can say I want tools to go to this person and my car to go to this person, my wedding ring to go to this person. That's great. But how do you handle things like apportionment of taxes? You want to make sure that however your expenses are going to be covered from your estate plan is done in a way that doesn't limit your estate, or you actually still have something to pass on. Again, the court's going to say, what's the simplest way to administer their estate and then pass on whatever's left over. They may liquidate retirement and sell a house, and those are the types of things. You're not going to get that type of planning, and you're not going to get that type of issue spotting to overcome on will kits. It's just not going to happen.
That's exactly right. And if there's one thing I know about estate planning, it's legalistic, to use a kind word. It is technical in terms of what you have to do to follow the rules, because if you don't follow the rules, you're back into the what happens if you don't make a will category.
Right.
So, someone trying to do it themselves, what are some of the problems they get into?
Yeah, again, probably one of the biggest ones that comes to mind is we're in a society where half, if not more than half, of individuals who get married end up being divorced, which means there's a good population that have blended families. And if you don't have an estate plan and try to create your own estate plan and you don't do it correctly, you could very well disinherit part of your family. If you have stepchildren, you want to make sure that they're taken care of, but you didn't do anything. Well, under the intestate succession rules in Oregon, stepchildren may not necessarily fall into the individuals that will inherit, which means there might be somewhat of a probate litigation or a fight from one child to another saying like, I think I should have inherited as well. It raises a lot more questions when you have kind of just a simple, will kit that just says XYZ goes to this person and XYZ goes to this person. Or, you know, you just list children and don't really define how children's supposed to mean stepchildren as well, or anything like that. So, you know, if you don't take those steps, then, you know, it's potential that you can overlook some big things. And again, going back to the taxes, there's ways to limit estate taxes in Oregon. And will kits, again, they're just not really going to give you the options or even tell you exactly what you need to do to try and limit those things. If you are, same-sex marriages or same-sex couples, you know, having a will kit, it doesn't explain that if you're not married, you don't have the same, you just have like a domestic partnership and never took the step to get married, you're not going to have the same rights and privileges that an actual married couple would have. And the will kit's not going to explain that to you.
That's hugely important. I mean, because that's an issue that goes, you know, even to, again, like insurance, people, you know, believe that they're in a domestic partnership or even a registered domestic partnership, that they have all of the same rights as married people, but they don't. And so getting married part or just making the will part.
Yeah.
So we covered all that, and we did cover about, you know, the need to update. And I really like that about, you know, not being able to make or shouldn't really consider making the will on your own. Heck, I can't even figure out how to do the witness thing right on a will. That's a step. Yeah. So finally, though, before we go, last question. So how can someone go forward from right now, especially in this time, you know, where we're being remote, and either start their estate process or review it?
Yeah. I mean, we're here, obviously. You can just, you know, give us a call, and we're happy to have a kind of a case evaluation and some brief calls with people to explain what's possible for them. You know, in the midst of COVID, everything is on its head, and people are worried and scared. And but also, this is a great time for people to take some steps and to take care of things like that. Especially, you know, it is a scary time, and you want to make sure that you're safe. But also, you want to make sure that if something was to happen to you, and God forbid that's the case, that your family members are taken care of. And it isn't as difficult of a process for people to that people may think. And, you know, we're here to help people walk through it, hold their hand, and make sure that they're taken care of. Sometimes as simple as a phone call can help the process entirely. And so, and help put a lot of people at ease to kind of get things started. And so you don't necessarily have to go digging for documents that you couldn't find for the past 20 years or whatever it is. That's what the attorney's for. That's what we're here for. We can tell you what's important, what you do need to find, and we can help, you know, find anything that's necessary. But some really, you know, just to get started, an email or a phone call will put people in a very, very good place.
That makes sense. You know, trusting the people who are better at it. It reminds me of when my first kid was born, and, you know, the doctor turns to me and says, "You want to cut the umbilical cord?" So I look around at everybody and I go, "Well, hold it. There's somebody in here that's got to be better equipped than me at doing this."
Right. Sometimes you just got to ask the question, you know, and seek the guidance. We are in a society where people are very much independent and capable, and socially, there's so many things at their fingertips that you can learn a lot. But there's reasons why people go to school for these things, and
for a long time.
Right.
So actually, I think we got to conclude. But thank you, Triston. This was really cool. And for everyone, that wraps up our broadcast today. We again hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you found the information helpful. We're going to be here on a bi-monthly and then sometimes a weekly basis. We're going to try to do it at the same time so you'll know where we're at. And, you know, and again, in these times, these topics are important, and we're here for you. And again, we got a new broadcast coming, Modern Family Matters, and it's going to be launching next week. It's aimed at addressing a myriad of real-life issues, legal, personal, financial, that touch real-life families. So as a reminder again, thanks, Triston. This is Steve Altition.
Thanks, Steve.
Really want to thank everyone for listening today, and stay well. Bye-bye.
Be well, everyone.